and we just started. We talked about the health Nuremberg Code, or Nuremberg trials, I guess, and about how the Tuskegee syphilis experiment really metastasized or was a catalyst really for producing our regulations that we currently have on human subjects protections. And those again, three ethical principles, one being autonomy or respect for persons. So a person can voluntarily consent to participate in research. Hey, you guys are up there on the screen. Oh, they're right there. That's great. I'm so excited. I love this stuff. But they need to have proper consenting to get involved in a project, and that's a huge issue. Beneficence, do no harm. In other words, the project or the study that you're involved in, you shouldn't expect to be harmed or injured or otherwise killed or something. And the risks are minimized. And then also that there's justice in the sense of the burden is shared among the population or throughout society for participating in research and benefiting from research. So you don't use populations out of convenience. And an example of that might be, it's still controversial that we use psychology students in like Psych 205, 102, or whatever it is. We have 500 or 600 students, and you can participate in a research study, or you can opt out. Anybody do that? Anybody? Did you do the research, or did you opt out, or did the research? Yeah. No. Yeah. Well, most people don't opt out because it's fun to do the research. But anyway, so there's some controversy about whether or not that's a population of convenience or not. Can you take the results from 18 to 22-year-old, affluent enough to go to college people and extrapolate those results to the general population or to other populations? There's lots of discussion about that. The rules and regs is that the OHRP, like in the animal subjects, there's a federal agency that oversees these rules and regulations. There's fun stuff to read. The Code of Federal Regulation, the 45 CFR 46, and then the FDA has its own. And we'll keep scooting through a lot of this, but the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, has a full board with 13, 15 members that review protocols once a month as a full board if the risk is more than minimal risk. And if it's less than that, it can be expedited, which doesn't mean it goes through review any faster. It just means you only need 1 or 2 board members to review it. And same with exempt. That means if it's less than minimal risk. And so like surveys and stuff that don't ask questions that may have some sort of bad outcome. And then other things like not human subject research, if you don't know what it is, it can be judged to be not human subjects research. So the board does all this, and the review looks at risks that should be minimized, that the subjects are, the risk to the subjects is reasonable. So a lot of this is right out of the Nuremberg Code. There's informed consent, there's some privacy and data confidentiality that's adequate, and the subjects that might be likely to coercion have some sort of they have rights and welfare that's being considered during the review. Informed consent, again, that follows the ethical principle of autonomy, and the idea of informed consent is that you have the ability to decide, you can appreciate the implications of your decision, you understand the facts, you can communicate that decision, you have plenty of opportunity to consider whether you're going to participate or not. There's no coercion, or at least minimal coercion, and undue influence. Now you can't quite see this person behind the 3 screens here, and that's okay. I could stop it, I suppose, and move the picture. Sure, why not? But what I want you to look at is whether or not you think that person that is sitting there being consented, whether or not they meet all these criteria. Oops. Maybe I can't do that. Nope. Okay, never mind. Oh, wait, there we go. I was just going to move the picture over. And there's the picture. I'll make it big and fuzzy. There you go. So does that person, really? Get out of the way. Okay. Okay, there we go. Is that person going through an adequate consent process, do you think, just by looking at it? No. No. Why? Why?
He's already in the gown.
Oh, I guess so. Okay, he's in the gown.
You can't know because you don't know the conversation that's occurring in the literature that's in front of him. You also don't know his mental state.
He's under pressure.
Is he 18?
Wow, this is great. Keep him on a roll. I won't say anything. Two more things.
Is that a doctor or a nurse?
Does it?
Or the PI?
Right. Okay. Good questions. We'll go to that here in a minute.
Is there a language barrier?
Language. Okay. That's wow. Okay. You far exceeded my literacy barrier. Far exceeded my expectations. I never come up with all those. Right. So let's say either a doctor or a nurse. That person's in medical garb and could be somewhat intimidating just by the fact that they're in the white lab coat. Right. He's already in his little garb. Let's say this is the consent. He doesn't even have it in his hands, and in theory, you're supposed to be able to read your consent. And I know, and just like that little terms of agreement when you sign up for Apple or whatever, I'm sure you sat and read everything, and then you question Tim Cook whether or not that you should agree to that. Right. You should though have the opportunity to review and ask questions of the investigator if that's the investigator. What does this mean? What does that mean? Do I stay overnight? Blah, blah, blah. You're right, you should be in your normal clothes so you can run out of there if you don't want to participate. So, right, this is all a good example of a bad process of consent. I have no idea what the picture really is supposed to show. I just snipped it off the internets at some point. But, so that's the idea. These are the elements of consent, where, and this is the way the whole document should read. It should talk about who you are as the PI, what's the purpose of the research, what are your qualifications, what's the risk, the benefit, alternatives, how confidentiality be maintained. All these things are written out in detail in the language and at the grade level that the participants are anticipated to understand. And then that participation is voluntary. You can jump out anytime you want. What about compensation? How much is enough to be involved in a study? Say I'm going to go by the clinic once a week and give a little tube of blood, and they're going to give me $500 each time I go.
Depends on what the population's willing to do.
But say that first part?
It depends on what the population is actually willing to basically sell themselves for.
Could be, yeah.
18-year-old college student, hey, $5, right?
Right. Well, yeah, right. Or how about an alcohol study and you get a pint of vodka at the end?
Oh, they do that in the Army where your duty for the whole day is to become drunk so that the military police personnel can practice the field sobriety tests. So, yeah, a lot of soldiers love that.
Oh, all right, remember, you may not want to say too many of these things. That's good. That's good. All right, so one thing the IRB and anybody that's looking at your study, whether it's a funding agency or the Army or something like that, is this compensation excessive, or is it just simply offsetting your time and usually you get a Walmart gift card for $20. Yeah.
I just want to interject here. I'm a readability expert, and so I can tell you, and I've worked in the medical field for a long time and do work in that area. And typically with informed consent forms, I can tell you that they're not written at the reading level. The average US adult reads at 8th grade level or below, or the average reading level is 8th grade. And like it or not, that's where folks are. And when I have helped clients, or for my own research, have revised the consent forms so that they are even approaching 9th or 10th grade level, I I send them in, and the IRBs have almost always sent them back and said, oh, that's not, you know, it's too dumbed down, which when we have not eliminated any content, all we've done is change the terminology, and they put it right back up, violating their own rules.
Huh.
I mean, it's in the code that they're supposed to be writing at the reading level of the intended audience.
Right.
And nobody's looking at literacy statistics, I can guarantee you that. I have no idea. And they have a template that they think is at the right level, but then the PI gets to put in the details in between. So it goes from maybe grade level 10 to grade level 20 to 10 to 20 to 10. I mean, nobody who reads at 8th grade level is going to read any of that stuff.
I will say IRBs do actually worry about that. In fact, and I do know that ones have sent them back because they are too unreadable. But I mean, yeah, I mean, and I'm not going to pick on any. Yeah, well, yeah, I've seen a lot of those things returned. But you're right, it's still not probably enough. So I'm not going to, let's see, privacy and confidentiality. I always wonder about, you know, whether we really, I think our bar's being lowered on privacy and confidentiality. Privacy, of course, is what you do in your spare time behind the safety of your home and all that. And confidentiality is the information about you, private information that should not be divulged if you say it's going to be confidential. You know, with Facebook and other social media, I think a lot of that's out the window. But that's still important, very important components of human subject research. And then vulnerable populations, whether they be the subpart B, the pregnant women, or C, prisoners, subpart D, children. Prisoners? Why would prisoners be vulnerable? They're crooks. They stole my bike or my stereo or something, and I mean they should be locked up, right? Why are they vulnerable?
Because they are in a position of lack of control of their environment. They're being controlled to the highest degree almost in a lot of cases. So it's
They're better off than soldiers.
I was going to ask you in a minute, Todd, about soldiers, but yeah.
Well, it depends on where you're at. Submariners are actually worse than prisoners. That's definitely true.
Submariners, okay. But anyway, you hit it though. Is that right? They're a captive population. They're literally limited in their mobility and their freedoms, of course. And so any IRB or any research project that has that accesses prison populations or any of the vulnerable subject populations listed here, including elderly and people that are disabled mentally and other ways, need to have an advocate on the IRB for them. There's commonly a prisoner advocate and a child advocate that are on most all IRB, at least the ones here anyway. Yeah, I don't know, Todd, if I want to ask you about military anymore at least for right now. We can talk more about those later.
I think it's kind of interesting that
I think we're
here it looks like fetuses get rights from the IRB, but they don't get rights in so many other areas of life.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they should be subject to extra protection under these clauses, but not protection from things like abortion.
Yeah, it's the thing is people, it comes down to what people feel is acceptable. Like, yeah, I fully understand. I agree with you. It definitely, you would think there'd be more of a congruency, but oftentimes it's people lobbying for less rights for certain areas and other people lobbying for more rights in certain areas. And there may not be lobbying in the same areas, so you have an overlap of what people get covered or how people are covered.
And I need to read the language in the 45 CFR 46. I mean that as to, and that's subpart B, as to what it talks about with fetuses. It's you know, I don't know, so I won't speak to that.
Well, that's part of the problem with soldiers is they're less than 1% of the population, and because of the nature of the lack of consent, the details of what the contract really implies when you come into the military, they can do whatever they want. And I've been given experimental well, injections. Not even sure what they were.
Well, there's stories.
But,
There's stories
but I was
coming
under-
down. Yeah.
But if I deny them, I was under threat of legal action against me by failure to obey order or regulation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Go figure that one out.
Your 5 minutes is going to be really interesting on week 10. Anyhow.
Yeah, it'll be a weird perspective.
Well, there are still information coming out about studies with military personnel. I mean, just recently, particularly minority soldiers in World War II that were. We'll cover that again.
Radiological experiments in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it still goes on.
And then there's HIPAA. HIPAA is just the Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act. And the purpose of that was originally to protect you from insurance companies from mining or disclosing your health history. It now, when you participate in a study, you can waive your HIPAA rights so that you can then allow them to access your medical history because that's part of the study. And that's what, in a nutshell, what the HIPAA's about. Okay, and then let me go to, I think, well, you don't care how to submit, I don't think. But it's electronic. There's an office over on the other side of campus. And there you go. All right, so human subjects research is, well, it's a moving target in lots of ways. There's a whole new set of rules and regs that are being released next week or something like that for comment, and it's to sort of update all of the what I just went through, basically, that the IRB's duties and responses, and it's well, we'll see how it comes out. There's been an effort to try and really tease apart the medical aspect of IRB, because that's what's really driven all the regulations. And so social scientists and educators and others have felt for a long time that, why do we have to go through all this when our risk is so much, I'll just say, different than the medical industry. So the revision is, I think, trying to get at a lot of that, trying to tease it apart a little bit. Okay. Ethical publication. This actually is kind of fun. Well, it's all fun, right? It's all exciting. So we see this, or I see this all the time. This is brain genetics paper retracted. That's from September last year. Serial plagiarism charge. That was August of last year. Here's one. Plagiarism allegations on a textbook on plagiarism. So maybe we've got some problem here somewhere. Then we also have things that I don't know if you want to call it research or not, but this was talking about big data. Big data scientists faced ethical challenges after Facebook study, and briefly stated, over 1 week in early 2012, Facebook randomly selected something of nearly 70,000 users and divided them into 4 groups. The users were exposed to a custom suite of posts on their news feeds dependent on Facebook's algorithms. But for 2 of the groups, Facebook tweaked the algorithm, making it less likely that the subjects would see posts automatically classified as containing either positive or negative language. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess it's on the next slide. And the researchers found that users who saw fewer positive posts were less likely to post something positive, and vice versa. Existing research had seemed to indicate that when people on Facebook compare the positive spin that friends post about their lives with the reality of the day-to-day, they can come away disappointed or sad. So the new study showed that similar emotional language was contagious, and went blah, blah, blah. So was this research? And were these people consented? And was there an outcome that you had to worry about if people became sad? I mean, if you have 700,000 people that you could make them sad, the chances are that someone might become really, really sad and have a negative outcome. But did you ever hear about this? Have you ever heard about this? So Facebook doesn't do this anymore and doesn't allow it anymore. to allow that you as a user just be randomly chosen to be subject of a study that someone wants to do, it's a little scary if you're out there in social media that, you know, I guess maybe you assume that by being on Facebook or in social media that this sort of thing can happen. But this shows it really did and really does. And there's the creepiness factor, as it says here, about how you are marketed every day, every moment that you're on your phone or on your page, and that there's people out there that are manipulating your feeds. Is it research? I don't know, but it's the way it goes into this, the idea of publication is that it came to light when this is the Chronicle of Higher Education did a story about it, and it was published in I don't see where here in the moment. Oh yeah, but I mean where it was published, I can't remember where the study was published. Collaboration with the academics published the study, and I think they had to, at Cornell, they had to retract it for some reason. Anyway, but it needed to go through an IRB approval of its research, and so and a couple other things. The other issue is that this is about, again, publication ethics. This is the good, the bad, or the I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I have a question. For example, let's say these millions, the people on Facebook, somebody went through the IRB and they were all consented. Conceivably, 700,000 people are consented, and they still came away sad. What's the difference? I mean.
Right. Well, no, the difference is that there's a review that's being done of the process that how the study was conducted, and this study had no review. So the point is that you may think, you know, your questions aren't particularly invasive, but it's good to get other opinions about it, and in the context of regulations as well. So.
I guess my point is that if somebody comes away sad, am I, the PI, responsible for what happens to them?
Well, in IRB,
if they consented.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So internet research is actually a very, very popular method, and there's a lot of it. And there's everything from people that lurk in chat rooms to, I mean, there's all sorts of research that goes on on internet platforms. But how that consent was issued was supposedly reviewed by an IRB, and a lot of the consents are not necessarily documented consents. And maybe we can talk about this more offline. But
Okay.
but there's an importance to going through the process. Yeah.
And who would Facebook go to? I mean, what's an IRB? Is it
Right.
freestanding
Very
IRB
good
to
point.
go to?
Very good point. So companies do this a lot of times. But if it's research, it's going to be published in a journal. The journal, and this is kind of comes back around to publications, will ask for your IRB approval, your protocol. So if you go to submit a research item that involves human subjects to the Journal of, I don't know, Advanced Psychology or something, they will want they're part of their, and we'll look at this here in a second, part of their editorial policy is that you provide evidence of IRB approval for that study. Let's go on. Here's a fellow that this was able to fake over 200 medical studies. Faked medical studies over 2 decades. How did he do that? Well, he started his own journal. Just put his papers through. Here's a really good thing, too. I know you guys are all going to love this. The percentage of women authors in academic publishing, this is for women out here, has risen to 30% since 1665. Yay, women. And it says, but women are still less likely to be first or last author and tend to cluster in subdisciplines, according to research at the University of Washington, analyzed 2 million academic papers published between, I don't know why 1665, but anyway, and 2010, by 2.7 million scientists, social scientists, and humanities scholars. What I like to see, and I haven't seen, is actually a graph showing how this. It's probably kind of a J-shaped curve. In other words, the number of women that are actually publishing. And we talked earlier, or the very first day, about how publications are sort of the bread and butter. I mean, it's how you get hired and retained, and you advance in your career. So, what do you think the issues are here?
Basically, it's stating that women are not, since they're not putting out as much publications, they're less likely to be hired in the same jobs.
You could conclude that, I guess. What other issues are here, do you think?
Gender bias in academia.
Is it getting better?
Marginally, I would say.
Is it the same in all disciplines?
So we at the law school that I was at, we had an interesting situation happen several times. They were trying to hire new professors, and they have a call out for professors every year. And what I thought was really interesting was they hired, I think it was 3 professors that they had trained at the institution and given them doctorates, and they denied 3 people tenure that they had also trained at the university and given them doctorates. And the 3 people that they denied tenure to were women, and the 3 that they hired and kept on were men. So it says that their training of you is not good enough if you're a woman, but they can't keep you. So I thought that was interesting, because it still definitely exists in my field.
I know in some disciplines, like in biology, for instance, I think the number of women faculty is at par with men faculty. I think it's about 50-50. I thought it was a little bit more. Somebody corrected me recently that said it's closer to 48 to 52 or something like that. And what does that do in biology? Well, it promotes more women being involved in biology as graduate students, I would think, which then feeds to
The bias of grouping. You're saying that this was talking about they tend to group in different areas.
Well, I don't know. I mean, physics might be different. Engineering might be different. Geology might be different. I don't know. In the medical industry, it seems like there's an awful lot. There's a lot more women in the roles of medical doctor than when I was a kid. But I don't know the numbers, and that was a long time ago when I think Neanderthals were still around.
Another influence that may be feeding into this is the fact that science, the language of science, is male-defined from a male perspective, and it interferes with the female perspective from really comprehending it. And so there's the foundational bias in science itself.
That could be true. I would say that anybody could be in any of these roles. So. And so not just women or men, but of any social, economic, or cultural background can also be in high academic roles, if you want to call it that. So anyway, the point is that I guess I'd like to see the more recent data for the last 20 years to see how women are doing as far as publishing, but. Anyway, I thought it was interesting that they could go back and pull data back from 1665. Okay. Now, if you do publish, there's certain responsibilities. This, for instance, is the Ecological Society of America Code of Ethics for Publications. Something that you can't read at all is this is JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. But I like this because it's very exhaustive, fairly exhaustive. There's this one section here is author responsibility, criteria, and contribution. This box here is confirmation of the conflicts of interest that you might encounter. And then the last part is acknowledgement statement. And what's interesting is, as an author, you certify that the manuscript represents original and valid work, and that neither this manuscript nor one with substantially similar content under my authorship has been published or is being considered for publication elsewhere. In other words, you don't submit the same manuscript to 2 different journals to get published. You submit it one place for its review and acceptance. If requested, I'll provide the data. For papers more than one author, I agreed to allow the corresponding author to serve as a primary correspondent, and it goes on and on and on. But then there's all these checkboxes. I have given final approval. I've participated sufficiently in the work. I take responsibility for the whole content or part of the content. To qualify for an author, you must check at least one box for each of 3 categories. So think about this. You know, I have made substantial contributions on the concept, design, acquisition of data, analysis, interpretation of data, drafting the manuscript, critical revision, statistical analysis, obtaining funding, supervision, and it goes on and on. And then for conflict of interest, I certify that all the funding and other financial support and material support for this work are clearly identified in the manuscript. So in other words, if you're doing work for a pharmaceutical company, or they hired you to do the study, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't publish that, because there is a conflict of interest if you're analyzing a product that they may be trying to market. But the point is that you've managed that conflict. You've said, yes, I got paid by this company to do this study, and here's my results. And so then whoever publishes it or whoever reads it acknowledges and knows there may be a perspective that you're trying to promote. There may be a bias. So that's the point of conflicts of interest. And then what's interesting about the acknowledgement statement is that if you acknowledge people in your paper, Dr. Betty Smith and Dr. Jim Jones read this over and they thought everything was great in my paper. Well, this says I did ask Jim and Betty that it was okay that I put them in my paper, and that just acknowledges that those people are aware of that testimonial, if you will. So this is fairly comprehensive. And has anybody here published papers? And it was, oh, good. And it was pretty effortless? You're like, yeah, no problem. Were you first author?
I was
Yes.
first author on 2 of them. One of them I was.
Okay. And how long did it take?
Well, we didn't have to do any of this stuff, that's for sure. The actual work took 6 months for the first 2 and another 4 or so, the other one.
What about you? You went, I don't think so.
Oh, it was fine overall, but it was definitely, review, revise, resubmit, type process. And it takes some effort, it takes some thick skin at times.
Yeah. Todd, did you have something?
Yeah, I was lead author on my paper for my master's, and I started writing it as soon as I started my research. It took 18 months, so that by the time it was everything was ready, I also was writing my thesis at the same time throughout the whole project. So it took a lot of effort, but because I did it the way I did it, when it came time for actual publication, it only took, it got kicked back once from Langmuir, and then for some minor things, and then it was published.
Yeah, and we probably don't have too much time to go through a lot of horror stories, but there are horror stories about people publishing papers. Some people have an easier time of it. That just means that you're obviously very well prepared.
I think it also depends on the field. So in the social sciences, for example,
Yeah.
I submitted one and they got back to me after 4 months.
Yeah.
And all my professors and mentors, said, well, that was really quick, because the average time would be 8 months.
Yeah. I think that's
Just to
right.
get back to you and say hey, you'll need to revise or do these modifications.
Revise and resubmit. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the most common responses. So when you do write a paper and you submit it to a journal, here you got this, and you take it down to the post office. No, I guess not. You submit it through the website, and it goes to some editor. The editor looks at it and goes, "Oh, this looks good. I think I'll put this in our journal, but let me send it out to some reviewers." So then she sends it to usually 2 reviewers, anonymous reviewers. We'll start with that. And one is usually a subject area expert, and the other one is, a good scientist or a good solid reviewer that's reviewed for the journal before. So it goes out to those folks. They get your manuscript. They read through it. Usually in about 2 or 3 weeks. That's kind of the expectation nowadays with editors. and then they come back to the editor with their review comments. The editor then takes her comments as well, and puts it all together in a nice little package and sends it back to you and says, all right, so these are some common things that the three of us found. And reviewer 1 wants you to do this and this, and reviewer 2 wants you to run some more trials on that, and then do that, put it all together, send it back, and we'll reevaluate it. Or they'll say, and then after you do those things, we'll accept it. They may go that far. So that's an anonymous review, but you are known as the author, and your institution is known. The more common trend now is to go anonymous reviewers and anonymous authors, anonymous institution. You strip all that stuff out of your paper, and you send it. So it's unknown to the reviewers as well. And let's sort of zip into. So I'm going to skip these because we kind of already touched on some of these
And
things.
the anonymous ones, do you find out at the very end after the decision has been reached, or is it stay anonymous? From your, if you submit, do you find out who reviewed it?
The ones I've reviewed, I don't find out until I see, oh, that title was similar to something I reviewed. Oh, that's who wrote it. Yeah, I don't see it until it comes out in the journal. I think, well, I don't know. I've never asked. I just get it done and get it off my desk. And authorship in what order? The Journal of the American Medical Association alluded to some order. In other words, who maybe contributed the most. Is there any rule of thumb that you all have followed in the past as to author orderness?
General contributions to the work, usually in order. I know not all fields are like that, but in mine that's pretty standard.
Or like Todd was talking about his thesis, so I mean probably he's first author on his thesis. And anybody have any problems with authorship in the past?
It wasn't really a problem, but for the first two, it more or less went based on seniority in the group.
Regardless of who thought of the idea?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that makes it easier for some people. Yeah.
I co-authored a book, and the first author who wrote most of it decided to list us in an order that I wasn't happy with because she put me third, and somebody who had done a lot less than I had second. But it was alphabetical, and so I don't know, when I questioned her about it, she said, oh, it's alphabetical, and I thought, okay, well, that was your choice to put it that way, right? So it was irritating, but she was the one who made the decision, and this was not for publication other than just a book that put out there.
I've seen it always in some disciplines. I've heard, yeah, right. It's alphabetical, except maybe the first author or the last author. There's some anchoring on that for some reason. I've been left off of papers that I funded and got the data and hired the people and went out on the thing. And I've been added on papers that I didn't think I had anything to do with to begin with. And I've had authors' order changed at the last minute for who knows whatever. But that happens. The thing about authorship, like with a couple other areas that we haven't hit yet, is that talk about it early. Figure it out early. And then keep talking about it. So, you say, oh, I'm going to write the method section. Okay, fine, and I'll be second author, even though because you thought all about it. Revisit that all the time. Say, okay, I got my part done, and whenever a draft comes around, make sure that the names are as you've all agreed to. And if it's not, then talk about it. Talking about it is the best thing. Surprises aren't very fun. There is something called self-plagiarism, and that is when you've sent your paper off and it's been accepted by a journal. You don't own it anymore. The journal now has the copyright of all those words. And so, if you're trapping mice and I go 10 paces and I drop my Sherman trap and I put some bait in, and then I go 10 paces, I drop my trap and put some bait in, and you can't say that again in the next paper. What you can say is, I followed the methods of Gannon et al. In 2012 with the following modifications. And so that's how you kind of get around the self-plagiarism idea. There's also ideas about what they call salami science. People want to publish things. You publish lots of little stuff, or you publish one big monograph, or do you publish something that makes sense? And It's that sort of in-between making sense thing that a lot of times people grapple with. What is the right amount of material, what part of the study, or is it the entire study that I work up as to a publication? Most of us don't have too much problem with, but if you're in a big lab that just really literally, you know, is pumping out stuff, when do you decide it's a publication? Anybody had any problems with that or any issues? I would think in some of the engineering areas there would be more discussion about it, but that's just because I'm naive. So the peer review, these two slides are more or less related. And what I just talked about, the different peer review systems, is you want to get away from bias. So if you disagree with a method or the focus, or you don't like the author or something like that, or if there's some sort of conflict of interest, or maybe you don't have the expertise to review a paper, or you don't like something about it, then don't do it. Send it back. Recuse yourself. That's what, avoid conflicts of interest and recuse yourself. You want to maintain confidentiality. You don't want to take things out of a paper or a grant that you've reviewed and just use them. And you want to be objective and fair and evaluate the merit and the contribution to knowledge. So the whole idea of the blind review is I think a really good one. This is just a little case study that's up on this little piece of paper is in the Dropbox. But I'm going to read it real quick. And these are the 6 questions that we're going to look at here. Dr. John Leonard, one of very few molecular biologists working in a particular field, receives a paper to review about a protein called survivin, which he and a graduate student in his lab are researching. The article was submitted by Dr. Mark Morris to the journal Protein Interactions, and the editors asked Leonard and 2 other experts in the field to review the paper, just like we talked about. It's typical. The article suggests a new interaction between survivin and the protein GFX and provides evidence for the fact that both proteins are necessary for the full survival promoting function of survivin in a cell. The results suggest also that high concentrations of survivin are fatal to the cell. Dr. Leonard gives it a quick review, and he finds the paper is full of problems, poor controls, inconsistent data in the figures, and alternative explanations are not considered, and the claims are overstated. That's a pretty good review. He gives the paper to his graduate student, Melissa Zane, who gives it a detailed critique and recommends significant revisions. Zane has never reviewed an article before, and Leonard thinks that doing so would be a good educational experience for her. Zane notes that finding too much survivin being toxic to cells, and that's a problem that she's been working with, and she discusses that with Leonard. Both agree that they should lower the dosage of survivin in her experiments. At the lower concentration of survivin, the cells actually survive longer, and then they do die off. Dr. Leonard submits Zane's and his own comments about the research to the editor, suggesting that the paper be accepted only after a few more experiments are performed to validate the conclusions. One of the other reviewers has comments similar, and the editor asks Dr. Morris, the author, to make the revisions before he'll accept the paper. Over the next few weeks, Leonard ponders the interaction between GFX and survivin, which was discussed in the reviewed manuscript. Although GFX was not a part of his studies that Leonard and Zane were doing, Leonard suggests to Zane that she add a compound to the culture that will stimulate the cell to produce its own GFX. This is a method somewhat different than the paper under review. The enhancement works, the cells live, and Zane and Leonard draft a paper based on their new results, which includes controls, to the journal Science. Science accepts it. Several months later, dun dun dun, the journal Protein Interactions publishes a revised paper from the lab of Dr. Morris. After Morris sees the article in Science, he suspects that Dr. Leonard, who was the anonymous peer reviewer on the Morris paper, might have taken some of the ideas for his Science article from his paper under review. Morris knows that Leonard hadn't been working on GFX because it's hard to purify, and deduces that he used information that was unpublished from the unpublished manuscript to stimulate GFX activity. What do you think?
Well, if he got the idea from reading of somebody else's paper, he should at least note or have noted in his article that he submitted that where he at least got the information from. He doesn't need to reference an article, because the article wasn't published yet, but he does need to at least give credit to the doctor person, or the person who had actually submitted a letter or information that he then used.
So here's the questions. That's one of the answers. What types of conflict of interest might arise? Is it ever appropriate for a peer reviewer to give a paper to a graduate student to review? Is it ever appropriate for a peer reviewer to use ideas from an article under review to stop unfruitful research? Is it ever appropriate for a reviewer to use ideas in a paper under review even if the reviewer's method to achieve a result that's different? If so, how should the reviewer proceed? What are the challenges of the current review process? And what recourse does Morris have if he suspects that his ideas were stolen, plagiarized? Okay, so is there any conflicts of interest here?
Yes.
Yes.
What's that?
They're both
The
working.
research was too close to the reviewer's research.
Ah, right. So the research was awfully close. Well, we'll jump to this little box here and see what it says here. Right, the reviewer, here's some examples of conflict of interest. The reviewer may benefit or not suffer financially from the findings of the paper or grant application, may be too close to the author or applicant, may not like the author or applicant, may disagree with the methods, may be in very clear and direct competition with the author or applicant, there you go, or may have religious or philosophical views that are a conflict. So yeah, so it seems like that Morris and Leonard were maybe not directly competing, but they are pretty darn close.
But then if they weren't close, would it even be possible for the person to review the paper effectively?
Right, so how do you find an area expert? So, and that's really a problem in fairly small or concentrated fields, that there's just a handful of experts in. And yeah, they all kind of do end up knowing each other. That is a problem. How about going to a graduate student?
Graduate students oftentimes read them more thoroughly than PIs do, because PIs will just say, oh, it's another paper on my desk, I've got 22 other things to do, and they'll just skim it. Whereas a graduate student will go through, I mean, I've been in this situation. I go through it line by line, I check the references, and when you do that, you find a lot of silly things like, oh, reference 23 should have been 24, and I caught like 50 things that wouldn't have been caught. I mean, there were minor things. The major content we did recommend it be accepted after some review, but I think graduate students, as long as the PI supervises the graduate student's review, it double checks to make sure he agrees with it.
And maybe one more thing. Oh, that's cute. And maybe one more thing is check with the editor of the journal. Say, hey, if you don't mind, I'm going to have my students look this over. You know, you can either add them or we'll just put them all together and give you one review back. Yeah. So right, so there's a learning process. As long as there's some mentoring going on, it's just not, oh, here, review this, and you review this one, and you review that one, and put my name on it, and then send them in.
But I did want to see the face on the guy when he saw my 30-point review.
Yeah, I can tell you what he said, or she said.
Someone says a graduate student.
Well, yeah. Okay, the third one was, is it ever appropriate to stop unfruitful research on grant-funded studies based on a confidential review?
Well, it makes sense that that would happen, but the ethical portion of that's the big hang up of if you wouldn't have known this information prior to.
Well, there's a nuance here. So first is, you know, you're all grant funded, let's say, and you're reviewing a paper and it says, oh, you know, if I do this, I'll stop wasting my time and money on this dead end path that I'm going down. So I'll stop based on this information.
Well, in that aspect, it might be wise, but the other thing about that is sometimes how papers are written can actually misconstrue something. So the path you are taking may actually still bear fruit.
Mm.
So they may have done something slightly different that effectively may look very similar, but it doesn't actually do what you think it does. So that, I don't know.
Well, here's the nuance then, and that's the fourth box, that is that okay, so you found this information out that, you've been going down this dead end to stop this work. So you take it, and you take that information and you modify your experiment, and then you keep moving with it. That's the nuance. What should you do in that case?
Ethically, you should wait until the publication is published before you change it, because since you can't actually reference the new information, it's a form of plagiarism.
Exactly. So, right, you have to wait till it's published. Or what's something else? I can't wait. It's going to be 4 months till this thing, 4 months, right, until this thing's published.
Contact the person who wrote the paper. And
Contact the
get
person who
their
wrote the paper.
permission.
And if you don't want to do that, contact the editor
Yeah.
and say, okay, that all makes sense. All right, you guys are good. So this one says, according to the guidelines of the Society of Neuroscience and other organizations, it's appropriate to stop unsuccessful research. The guidelines state, if information obtained during the review of a manuscript indicates that some of the reviewer's own research is unlikely to be successful, again, you don't know if things may bear fruit, that's a good point. It would be ethical for the reviewer to discontinue the research. It's still recommended the reviewer tell the author about those activities, and then likewise, if a peer reviewer feels that he or she must use the information contained in an article or grant application, the reviewer may be able to contact the author or applicant trying to establish a relationship, form a collaboration. That's a great idea. Otherwise, it's misconduct to plagiarize. Okay. The fifth one, we talked about, doing the anonymous reviewing and anonymous the author. And then the last one, what recourse did Morris have if he thinks he got scooped? Not just scooped, plagiarized. What should Morris have done, or what should he maybe do?
Can he submit, basically, just submit something saying that this is plagiarism due to contacting his editor of the first, so contacting his editor and say, hey, this was plagiarized from me, it looks very much like my stuff. And if he knows who the editor then identifies that it is, it can be, I believe, conducted in a court of law, or it could go that far.
You named a bunch of the possibilities, right? You could hire a lawyer, I suppose, but like you could be a whistleblower on yourself, basically. You've got the evidence, you've got the reviewer's comments, you've got where it went to the journal can tell you who the reviewers were. Take all that, send it off to this guy's institution, and let the process of research misconduct investigation proceed. So inappropriate peer review, there might be a way to address the situation. To seek legal, no. The institution will deal with the alleged misconduct. Contacting the journal or the granting agency may also be considered too. So, all right. Peer review. Okay, there we go. That just says the most scientists regarded the new streamlined peer review process as quite an improvement. Sorry, it's an old cartoon. Data acquisition, ownership, data entry. I'm going to save some of that for a little bit later, like next time. But I do want to, there's a second scenario or case that I'm not going to read because we will not have time to go through it. But I want to give you the points of it. This is a PhD student who finished at an institution and had her professor who had grant funding. And she had 3 lines of inquiry that she was going to do for her graduate project. It turned out she set 2 aside and pursued 1 to get her PhD. And then she got a job somewhere, and mostly a teaching college in the Midwest, according to the case study. And she decided, well, I'm going to take this new job, but those 2 lines of study that I didn't follow as a graduate student, I want to do that when I'm at my new institution. So she went into her professor's office and got on his computer and downloaded the data and downloaded the program to run the data with. And he comes in, he says, hey, you can't do that. And she said, well, why not? It's my project. He said, well, no, this is all a grant-funded deal, and I got other students that are coming in. You're going to have to, you can't do that. Leave it here. What's wrong with you? Basically. And she's like, wow, but it's my data. And he said, no, it's not. It's not your data. It belongs to the institution. So she walks out and runs into her buddy, and her buddy says, Well, you know, I know he's going to be gone this weekend, so let's just go in his office this weekend, and we'll get the rest of the data. What would you do? Is that your data?
Well,
You worked on it for 4 years.
doesn't matter, it belongs to the institution.
I'm so bummed.
There's some of the paperwork you even sign, like when you do sign on to stuff, says that you are giving up your intellectual rights to anything you work on.
Jeez. All right, maybe you're right. Who owns data? In federally sponsored research, the university owns data but allows the PI to be the steward of the data. The PI takes responsibility for collection, recording, storage, retention, and disposal. And the people in the lab or the research project just essentially are working for UNM, in this case, which assigns the rights, again, to the PI. And then the PI has, when they publish the paper, they can assign the rights to the journal, but they're still in charge of the data. Faculty members, let's see. Oh, the copyright blank. Okay, data and data books collected by undergraduates, graduates, and postdoc fellows on a research project belong to the institution, and students should not take their data, although retaining copies is allowed with permission. So that might have been a good idea to say, can I take a copy? Or maybe before then, like 2 years ago. You know, I'm not going to do these 2 avenues of research. I'm going to do this one. But, you know, I'm really interested in these. Can I continue to work on these when I'm done? Yeah, sure.
I guess in a question of that, would it basically be able to do a collaboration effect? Requesting a collaboration.
Yeah, yeah. That's what the next question is going to. Geez, man, did you write these slides? So how can this problem be avoided? Well, first, two reasons. The faculty member, Hayward, and all the faculty members in the department should have made it clear day one. You know, you're working in my lab, you're working in this department, this is our data policy. And so like working in authorship, like being an author, talk about it early, talk about it often, talk about it next lab meeting, you know. So I'm still going to use those data, right? Okay. And then under what conditions should data be copied? Had Banks known who owned data, she could have asked Hayward for permission to copy the data in the software and discuss possibly collaborating with him when she starts her new position. And this is kind of crucial here. It says, Banks would no doubt like to continue work that she had started and maintain good relations with her former mentor, who would give her recommendations for future employment. You don't want to be all PO'd with your advisor and vice versa when you're all done, because right, you're going to write grants. Who are you going to get letters of recommendation from? You're going to get a different job out of the teaching university. Who are you going to get a recommendation from? Stealing data would not be the best way to start off your professional relationship. And as a mentor-mentee, that's not a good idea either. Okay. Data storage and retention. Just at UNM, I think the basic policy is 5 years. After your data have been published and after the grant's expired, just rule of thumb, hold on to original data for 5 years. Some places have data banks, Globovault, CASA has its own data storage mechanism. As in reality, though, and it says here, researchers in practice store as long as they want to. And, which I still have chipmunk data from 1884, so I don't know why. Can't throw it away. And then the last 2 things. This is data management and warehousing and ethics. Basically, these 5 things. Warehousing. Have a strategy, centralize where your data is stored, organize in a standard fashion, have copies, and have a security plan for maintaining your data. The bottom line is Starbucks is not a great place to get online and work on confidential data like human subjects research. Or even pay your MasterCard bill for that matter. Just drink coffee there and read books and stuff. But your home's pretty good, and UNM is generally pretty secure for data. The other thing is have a hit by the bus plan. So if somebody depends on you for data or passwords or security or something, make sure there's a backup. Make sure the good guys can get at those data if you don't show up to work the next day. You decide, oh, I fell in love, I'm going to the Bahamas forever, and it'll be forever and wonderful, and you don't come to work. Make sure somebody can figure out how to get to those data, because you have an obligation to them. But by the same means, make sure the bad guys don't get to your data. So that's what these two slides give some. And Kevin Comerford is in University Libraries is an expert on this, and he's always willing to talk about data and storage and retention and all that stuff. Okay, last but not least, this is the data sharing policy NSF has. NSF expects significant findings from research and activities it supports to be promptly submitted for publication with authorship. This kind of sums everything up. With authorship that reflects the contributions of those involved, it expects investigators to share with others at no more than incremental cost and within a reasonable time data, samples, physical collections, and other samples of supporting materials created or gathered during the course of the work. It also encourages awardees to share software and inventions to make it useful and usable. Exceptions have to do with human subjects and collection and bigger collections. So that's that. Oh, here's a lady that was actually thrown in jail for stealing lab notebooks, but you can read about her some other time. All right, that's it. See you next week. Goodbye and good luck. It's fine.